Sorry you had to wait for us to be ready. Anyway, so this morning we heard some very penetrating and sometimes moving accounts, and obviously terrifying accounts, of the methodologies of cults. And we heard about the processes, something about the processes by which far-right organisations sort of dehumanise people. So this afternoon we're going to go into the Jeremiah's actual case and the family's 12-year quest for justice, which is not really over. I mean, nobody can say that they achieved justice yesterday by that verdict. So Erica and Hugo are going to talk about aspects of their fight against the sort of institutions that are supposed to provide justice. The institutions in Germany that are supposed to investigate suspicious deaths. And Liz mentioned this morning sorry, I should have introduced myself. I'm Frances Weber. I'm a colleague of Liz at the Institute of Race Relations, and also a former member of these chambers. Liz talked this morning about the fact that the Institute got involved with trying to help Erica and Hugo in their quest for justice when these parallels struck us. These parallels, they struck Liz in particular because of her work in Germany, her work with the organisation NSU Watch. The parallels with the extraordinarily negligent, to say the very least, investigation of the far-right movements, which were, as we well knew, were thoroughly infiltrated by the German intelligence service, who were unable to, or unwilling to provide answers, to provide truth, or to provide justice to the victims and their families. So the parallels were immediate and quite very disturbing. Obviously, well, I want to hand over to Erica straight away, who will talk about her and the family's experiences in trying to get to the bottom of what happened. After we've heard from the family, I think we'll hear from Hugo and we'll hear from, I think Esther's got something to say. And then we'll hear from Serdar Kaya, the family's lawyer in Germany, who will tell us something about what mechanisms exist to provide truthful justice in these circumstances. And then we'll open it up to the floor. We have some very special people in the audience. Obviously, some of you have already spoken, some of you haven't, including Eddie Jones, who's also done a lot of work on police communication, on police racism, institutional racism and neglect in Germany. So we start with Erica.
Well, I'd like to start by saying I'm not sure that I'm going to manage this speech because there's so much that I need to put into it. I think if I could take all of you to my room, which has grown bigger, and open the cupboards, and you were to see the hundreds of files and see the tables with the documents overflowing, perhaps you realise the difficult task I've got to try and make a selection, because it's been 12 years. I've been through two or three computers, and there's just almost too much. So what I thought I would do, because many of you have been to the Inquest and you've read our two websites, Justice for Jeremiah and also LaroucheDanger.com. We have a lot of information there. So what I thought of doing is beginning at the start and talking about what faced us in Germany and what we were left with and what we tried to do, because we were not helped with the investigation, and so we had to take that upon ourselves. And I also want to encompass what happened in Britain, and whether the British institutions helped us. And then if I can quickly move on, I shall go to the Inquest. And this will be a wonderful chance for me. I haven't quite decided how and what I will say, because it's almost too raw and too recent. But the question will be that I would love you all to discuss is whether or not there has been justice for Jeremiah. And at the very end of that, I think also my daughter Esther, who wants to bring our attention to what laws are in place this year, which might help us uphold some kind of legacy that Jeremiah might hold, and that is to bring it more to the fore and raise awareness about the dangers of extremist groups, their methods, if we use the word cult, and also perhaps how at some point I would really like to raise the whole issue of the law, which actually is the way that we try to go, follow the law. So to begin with, we have the phone call when my son alerted me to who was responsible for putting him in a dangerous position, and he named them Solidarity et Progrès. And there was no doubt in my mind. I thought he somehow got involved with a terrorist organization. He knows too much. If he tries to speak out, he's in danger, and if he stays, he's in danger. And at that stage, I did everything that I could, that anybody would think of doing, and that is I made this 999 call. And I don't know if I told the coroner yesterday, but he could have read about it, that I didn't get much help from my 999 call. In fact, I was actually almost, I was insulted on the phone, because they said, who told you to put you through? How do you know my number? Who are you? Why are you ringing me? It was the most terrible attack that I felt by ringing up and reporting what I thought was a crime. I'd got nowhere. The man refused to give me any information about Solidarity et Progrès. He refused to ring me back, and to this day, I've never had any reply from the British police to my 999 call, and I stand here still waiting for it. Now let's return to Germany. When the next day we went to Germany and we sat opposite Inspector Schecker, and I'm looking at my German lawyer because we're always speaking about Inspector Schecker, he said, well, your son was not a child, your son was 22 years old, he knew what he was doing, and he went with these people. And he committed suicide. And of course we did say, well, suicide, we've been ringing you, he told me he was in danger, this is not suicide. And from then onwards, all the things that he said, for example, I asked him about the Larouche organization, and he said, no comment. I asked him, we wanted an investigation because we didn't accept it was suicide. And he said, we don't need to investigate, it's suicide. We asked him, how do you know it's suicide? Oh, they're witnesses, he said. Really? Can we see their statements? No, you can't. That's only for the prosecutor. Well, that leads us into another story, so I haven't time for that. Then we said, well, he said, when can we see our son? And he said, well, you can't see him, you'll have to see him, he mumbled. And the long of the short was, we never identified his body, and we had to wait over the weekend to the following Monday, when the prosecutor had closed the files. Inspector Schaffer said, well, everything is closed, we just have to stamp the files, it goes to the prosecutor, and then you can take the body and do what you like with it. So Hugo, who was there, said, well, you just want to get rid of us as quickly as possible. And we did discuss, you know, how we couldn't understand what was going on. And the member of the Foreign Office who was there said, oh, because we said, well, surely, you know, we'd have some sort of investigation, we'd be able to know what happened, what were the circumstances, and questioned him, we would have a post-mortem. Oh, that was the other thing. He said there was no need for a post-mortem. And he also said a doctor had examined the body, which was a lie. No medical practitioner, no, there was no medical examination of any kind or description to see if his injuries were caused by being hit or run over by a car. So the member of the Foreign Office who we appealed to, who was in the office, said, oh well, yes, it is a bit different in England, but put it down to cultural differences. So as far as I'm concerned, a form of institutional racism, which I believe exists in Wiesbaden, in which they don't see the danger of everything we spoke about this morning, the dangers of methods of extremist groups, or even just extremist groups who incite hatred. There is a sort of mindset that does not care, does not want to know, and certainly doesn't want to investigate any possible danger. Well, after that, and we're talking about 12 years, I was involved myself in trying to see if we could get an investigation. I won't go into the British inquest. I won't go into, except to say that when my son's body arrived in this country, and these are all the things that I wasn't allowed to say yesterday in the inquest, his body arrived with no papers as to cause of death. So we have these death certificates written in German, of course, so the coroner had no real way of even knowing what they were about. But we knew, because we'd been told by the Foreign Office, there would be no cause of death. So he did have a post-mortem, which we believe would tell us that he was really killed by the cars. Because at the time, as I said, I thought he was involved with a terrorist organisation, and I didn't believe that he committed suicide. But we were led to believe, or misled, that this post-mortem had established the cause of his death. So that is another UK story about failures in an institutional level. Well, what I had to then engage with was lawyers in Germany. And strangely enough, this particular chambers, there was, just for the moment, I can't remember his name, he was head of the chambers, Owen Davis. Well, he said, he was sort of came into it to advise me who would be a good German lawyer, and he did he did go to Germany, and he found this lawyer that I had for many years. And we went through the law, we went through all the courts, and we tried to put forward our arguments why there should be an investigation when there was no investigation. But on all accounts, going through the courts, up to the highest court, which was the Constitutional Court, when you came involved, all our applications had been refused on the grounds that, in terms of the law in Germany, if you commit suicide, you don't have to investigate. And that's the information that they had at the time. There was a small collection of papers, a collection of hearsay evidence, not really written by the policeman who'd interviewed anybody, because there were no witness statements. One policeman had told another policeman who told somebody else who wrote it up, and then a third policeman, our friend Inspector Schaffer, then sort of wrote about it. He was the investigating officer. He arrived on the scene 5 minutes after the drivers alleged drivers had left the scene. So the reason why we failed up to this point going through the courts was because the answer was, well, what the police had at that time, you know, there was no real suspicion. That was it. There was no suspicion of third-party involvement, suicide. They couldn't do anything else. And then I was told by this lawyer that I had in Germany, it was up to me to provide some evidence to question that it was suicide. Because incidentally, they disregarded the first inquest, which actually also discovered suicide, leave that aside. So I then was a mother, and I had to go into the position of investigating the death of my own son. And so that is really what I did. So I'm going away from Germany and now telling you about, very briefly about what I had to do. Well, I knew nothing about Larouche, or I knew nothing about cults. And a month after my son died, I looked up, you know, the internet, because there wasn't very much on Larouche at the time. There really wasn't, not that much. And I saw Rick Ross, I think it was a cult information service. And I wrote to them and I said, I didn't say my son is dead, I just said, my son's got involved with an organisation called the Schiller Institute. Could you give me some information on it? And I remember it was a Saturday night. And almost within a few moments I got this email back. Do not approach him. Do not try and persuade him otherwise. Employ an exit counsellor. This is a dangerous, destructive cult. And from then on, I was just glued to the internet, and I was investigating and reading everything I could because I needed to find out about these groups. No one up to that point had ever told me. Nobody in Germany had said, we've got books, and they did have books, they had many books. We know all about this organisation, it's anti-Semitic, it's dangerous, nothing. It was my investigations, and then somehow I think there was various news reports, and it was actually Newsweek that said to me, well, there's only one person who's a private detective, you must employ him, and he'll help you. So, I mean, there is almost so much to tell you, but through this private detective, and through various other things that happened, we located people that had been with my son in France. And I went over and I befriended one of them, who was then an ex-member, and we trooped around France. I also once sat on the phone for about 2 or 3 nights reading up every surname, which was Weisgeber, to try and track down this one and only boy who I knew had been friends with my son, which we did eventually, and he gave a very good witness statement, which the coroner disregarded yesterday, and he described my son. But anyway, I remember once day we made a trip to Rennes, and to speak to the boy that was with my son, on his last night, and he wouldn't speak to us. And just to give you an example of it, we were always quite fearful that the Larouche organisation was dangerous. So the girl that I went with, we decided to go under false names. And we were Mademoiselle and Madame Renard. And we stayed in this hotel for quite a long time. All this cost money, every day trying to go to the person's house and to appeal to different people. Eventually we got through to a sister, and we worked on her. And when we were about to give up, I'm telling you this story because it's just amazing. We were packing up to leave. Suddenly this man arrived. And of course he only spoke French, and I was recording it and everything. And I had, I was going to show you. I had planned that when he came, I put one of these, this one of the Larouche magazines, which says, Zionism is not Judaism, and some of that, I just put it down, and I remember he came in and he said, that's right. And anyway, we tried to gather information from him, and he told us he'd been told to shut his mouth by the wife of the leader of the Solidarity in Bulgaria, and he obviously wasn't going to speak very much to us, but he was really trying to find out what we knew. So anyway, that's just an example, because I had to take it upon myself to be a private investigator, because it got too expensive with this private detective. But anyway, we did have a bit of information to give our lawyer, not the ones we got later on, but we did. And because he'd said to me, you've got to have some information to open this case, you know. Well, then it turned out it was all refused, and the reason it was refused was because it came from me. So, on the one hand, I'm told, you know, you've got to open the case by your information, and on the other hand, I'm told, well, if it comes from you, we're not going to count it, which was actually what happened. So that got us nowhere. We eventually, you know, got a bit upset about the whole thing, and I think this particular lawyer, who tried very hard for a couple of years, I don't know how many years, 5 years, you could see he was getting a bit tired of me. And we then, through a friend of mine who's actually studying anti-Semitism, I was recommended to, who was quite a young lawyer at the time, weren't you? I don't know how. Not that you're old now. Yeah. You hadn't been, how long had you been in practice? About 4 years. 4 or 5 years. So I think he was very hesitant of taking on this complicated case, perhaps. You weren't? Good. Anyway, I was really glad he did. And from then on, we went through the law, and we didn't get very far. The case was closed, and we then started with Lee Day and the second inquest. And that was a huge battle for this country to get a second inquest. We had to get the Attorney General, and there were all sorts of strange things that happened in terms of files missing, this going. You know, it was like you couldn't have written a story about it, could you, Marion? You know about that. And eventually I got an apology from the Attorney General for failing to take any notice. We got the new inquest. That was how many years ago? 5 years ago we got the new inquest. And there was so much work, you know, trying to get the facts for the coroner. Years and years. The coroner gives questions to the German authorities don't answer them. I also speak to a liaison officer. I draw up questions, they're not answered. Nothing's happening in France, nothing's happening in Britain. And so we go on and on and on. And in the end, we decided we'd have a conference in Berlin, because I had the idea that if we did nothing else, we would expose the danger of this organisation. So we held a conference in Berlin, and Matthew Feldman came to speak. We had politicians, and we had Eve Messer, we had ex-members. We had a Glaya, who was also an ex-member of the book. And we had parents from France, and other parents, and we had a panel, and they all discussed the question, is the Larouche organisation a threat to the individual and a danger to society? And we discussed that. And it was at that conference, unknown to me, that the mother of the bodyguard of Helga Zepp Larouche somehow spoke to Ursula Caberta, who was then an official of Hamburg. And you might know her because she's done a lot of work campaigning against Scientology, and she was her job was really to support families. There's not many people who do that. Well, she, the mother of, I can mention his name now, can't I? Or can I?
It was on the record, yes?
It was on the record. Okay, it's all over the world now. Niels Meyer, who was the bodyguard. Niels Feyer. So the mother, somehow after that, she kept ringing up Ursula Caberta, and it was all a very difficult situation, but she said her son had confessed to her that Jeremiah was a traitor, a spy, and he deserved to die. And various pieces of information sort of filtered through that he was. She said something, and then the mother said something to another person. And to summarize it, there seemed to have been some attack made of Jeremiah. And one of the information was that he was chaste. Then we had another anonymous witness, because of course there's a great deal of intimidation behind this, who went himself to a lawyer, and he made a statement about the fact that Jeremiah was not in the Apple flat, and I do believe he was not, and that's another story, but he was in the offices of the Executive Intelligence Review, which is the offices of the Larouche organization. And it was from there that somehow he either ran away or was taken, and his body was found very, very near to this offices. Whereas in the official story that the coroner accepted yesterday, accepted without any input from us about whether or not this was true, it even didn't read out a statement from the anonymous witness, the coroner accepted that he was in the flat of Mr. and Mrs. Apple. Yes, really? And Mr. and Mrs. Apple are the biggest liars in the world. And that I know personally, because I've spoken to Mr. Apple on the phone, and I've heard how many times he clears his throat when he's lying. And one of the things that both of them couldn't care if I spoiled the German case, because I don't really believe that there is a German case. I'm probably saying the wrong thing to my German lawyer. But anyway, the long and the short of it is, the Apples have never really, they weren't interviewed. Originally, it was said by Inspector Schacher, that's right at the beginning, that these Apples, these people where my son was in their flat, were nothing to do with the organisation. They were just ordinary people. Do you remember that, Hugo? Who are they? I said, just ordinary people, they know nothing. Well, they weren't. They were directors of the Executive Intelligence Review. So there was lies upon lies that we were fed. But anyway, they have never admitted that he was in their flat. They have never admitted they heard the so-called bell ring when the son ran off. So if he wasn't in their flat, and I believe he wasn't, because it's 5.5 kilometers from where his body was found, and if you time it from when he rang me, there's no way that he could have run that distance from the flat to where his body was found. And that was also upheld, wasn't it, by the later court decision. Anyway, so in Germany, to bring this to a little bit of a close, whether the case was open or whether the case was closed, it appeared that the coroner couldn't get any information. And then, as we got a bit nearer, as we're going right up to more recent times, as we got a bit nearer, suddenly I think the prosecutor in Germany must have got a bit worried, because they started sending, well, how many days ago, about a week or 2 weeks ago, a pile of German documents, which were really, some of them dating back to 2003, in German. Yes, they sent on tape the German files. The German files were mostly our legal case, because they didn't investigate, or all the documents from the lawyers. It consisted of also the fact that they had brought back Inspector Schacher, who 12 years ago had destroyed our son's clothes when we asked for them, had said it was suicide and he wouldn't investigate, had written to one of his prosecutors saying the post-mortem had taken place in the Südfried cemetery when there had been no post-mortem. Actually, it was him, and he'd undressed my son's body and taken photographs. So the very policeman who I consider to be totally unsuitable to be brought back again was brought back to create another cover-up job, and this is exactly what he did. And when his pathetic interviews, which never really asked key questions, was then sort of gathered together, some people refusing to even come to be interviewed. I mean, the main people, Niels Meyer, Lemke, the driver, some of them didn't come, they just went to lawyers and wanted statements. So they brought back Schacher, who, as far as I'm concerned, did these documents which were sent to the coroner. So the coroner yesterday, how much longer? I didn't want to go over 5 minutes. Well, so the coroner really, in the 3 days that he's started off by reading. He started off by reading the witness statements that Inspector Schacher had got from the drivers, because it's complicated and perhaps I haven't got time to explain it all. Perhaps instead will pick that up, or Hugo will sort of put you all to sleep. But there are two incidents. It is getting very complicated. The first incident, when my son is supposed to have jumped out in front of cars, being hit, hurled in the air, fell on the floor, and got up and ran off. Well, unless he was a rubber man, it's unlikely. He was also supposed to be wearing a long, dark coat, which he didn't have on, and the coat has disappeared. So the first incident is supposed to have happened prior to the incident where he died. So, of course, if we look at it superficially, and you just page through the police report, you do have these drivers. You've got two drivers in the first incident, or one, and you've got in the second incident the two drivers that are supposed to have hit him and run over him. The coroner read out the statements from these drivers. That's how he began the inquest. So at no point could we say, well, there's certain things about these drivers that are questionable. You've never looked into the history of the drivers. How long did they own those cars? Because originally I found out when we were looking into it, those cars were not registered. There were all sorts of strange things. And I didn't feel having the second driver, but she didn't come in to be interviewed. And she wrote a statement, and she never said whether she ran over Jeremiah. And the thing that always puzzled me, two things, not being an expert, was one, if they're driving at speed and they suddenly stop, wouldn't the airbags come? And if somebody's run over on the right side, how does their body end up on the left side? So at the inquest yesterday, we couldn't go into all the details. We were not allowed, apparently, to make any submissions in which we would say that the first report done by Inspector Schaffer was so flawed, there were no witness statements, and they were flawed and incorrect. We weren't allowed to criticize that, and yet we used the information gathered by the same policeman who I'm sure in this country would have been dismissed. But he was not. He was employed to go on covering his own mistakes, if that's all that it's about. The coroner then did hear from about, 3 or 4 forensic experts, all of whom raised questions about whether the crash happened. Then there were a number of witness statements, the ones that were kind of gathered, as I said, when I was doing my private investigating. And eventually what happened with those investigations was that Nicholas Becker, who was the lawyer, then went to Paris and he actually interviewed these people and signed them up. So although extracts were read out by these witnesses, which did testify that Jeremiah was subjected to the dangerous methods of psychological methods of cults, and also did testify that, or lead on to say that he was not in the place they said in the flat, he was in their offices. But of course, if we could prove that he was in their offices, that would bring them into the equation. That would mean the Larouche organization is directly involved in his death. And what the coroner was saying all the time, show me the connection. I don't see the connection between the Larouche organization and the death. I don't see it. And to me, when I stand here now still thinking about it, it's the same. I said to you, I said, I'm facing Schaffer. And what I mean is, I'm facing this mindset. You don't want to see something, so you don't see it. He didn't want to see or understand what cults can do and how they can do the most fantastical things, which Chip has been talking about, the Tavistock and spies and traitors and assassins. It is fantastical. And I would say that because this organization is so bred on fantasy, it wouldn't be past them to make up some sort of story of a crash to cover up if there was an unlawful killing. It wouldn't be past them, and certainly their leader was there, He'd have all sorts of people to help him. So although it does sound very far-fetched to make up a crash, and even I think, you know, well, could such a thing have ever happened? When you hear the evidence of the forensic experts that there were no traces on his body, and that you think that I met the pathologist who did the post-mortem in this country, and he told me my son was beaten to death. There is a lot of information that questions the crash. So we don't really know where he was. We don't really know how he died. But there is one thing we do know, and that was he was subjected to the danger of this Larouche cult. That is the only thing we can really hold on to. And the second part of the coroner's statement, in a very sort of, and my mother says it's wishy-washy. And it is wishy-washy. It's a kind of sanitized version. I think you've got it too. And all it says is, oh, it might have been that he was under the influence of this Larouche organization. It isn't might have been. He named them. He was in a state of fear and panic. He died as a result of being with them. And if he'd never gone to Germany, he would be alive today.